Can everyone hear me? Everybody see the screen? Volume. Quick question, did I give John's email contact, or did he give it to you? I can't remember now. Gosh. Okay, so what was I going to say? I was going to say something. Oh, believe it or not, folks, we're only like, I think, 4 weeks before the end of the semester. So we're quickly approaching the end of the semester, believe it or not. So these last 4 weeks are really going to fly by. So I don't know what's going on in your lives, but try to focus as much as you can on your school. I know some of you have complicated lives, but do the best that you can. It's almost over. You're almost done. Some of you are going to be. This is the last 4 weeks of you being students. Congratulations. You're almost there, and so try to finish strong. Okay, so I think where I left off on Wednesday, I was talking about distribution fees. Well, actually, I hadn't talked about it. I was going to start talking about distribution fees. So does anybody, just hypothetically speaking, or not hypothetically, but does anybody know here within the chat on this room or class, what is distribution fee for a studio film? Does anybody know? For a domestic release? Anybody? No? Crickets. Okay, so I'm assuming the answer is no, since nobody's responded. So a distribution fee is essentially it's whatever money is collected by the theater, by the studio or distributor from the theaters. That's called a film rental. So usually whenever you see a box office, the distributor is only collecting about 50% of what you see as box office, as film rental. Of that film rental, the studio is going to charge you, or not charge you, but charge a producer a distribution fee. And that distribution fee domestically in the United States and Canada is 30%. So again, the distribution fee domestically, DOM, is 30%. It could be a little bit lower, like 27%. Could be a little bit higher, like 32%. But generally speaking, rule of thumb, it's 30% distribution fee. International distribution fee is 40%. So international would be, let's say that you distributed your movie to, let's say, Germany or to, let's say, Mexico. Even though Mexico is part of North America, it's not counted as North America, it's counted as international. So that's 40%. So international is 40%. Now, sub-distribution. So the studios don't have offices in every country, and so, or territories. And so in this particular case, you would have to sign a sub-distribution deal. So I know this is going to sound kind of weird, but Puerto Rico has a sub distribution deal, or at least used to when I used to work in film. And basically meaning there's no office in Puerto Rico. So what ends up happening when you have a sub distribution deal is that you actually have to make a deal with the sub distributor, and the sub distributor adds on a fee. So instead of 40% for international, it's 40% plus the sub distribution fee. So when I used to work in distribution, I was the only person in the office that could speak Spanish. So they sent me to Puerto Rico, and I had to do a deal with the sub distributor in Puerto Rico. This one dude literally like distributed movies throughout the entire island of Puerto Rico. And I can't remember what he charged me. I think 10%. So there's a sub distribution fee on top of the international fee for sub distribution. Hopefully that made sense. And then there's rent a distributor. So rent a distributor means that you actually have a rich producer. Let's just say it's somebody like a George Lucas, or another example would be like Mel Gibson. I mean, it's not a typical film producer, but if you think about Passion of the Christ, I believe he was the producer. He paid. So in the case of rent a distributor, you actually have a rich producer who pays for all the distribution costs. In other words, they pay for all the prints, they're willing to pay for all the advertising. And so you're just using a distributor for a rent distributor for its connections. And so that in that case, you're going to get, the distributor is going to charge you a lot less than 30%, or a lot less than 40%, or a lot less than 40% plus distribution fee. They're going to charge you far less than 30% when a rich producer pays for distribution, and they're just hiring a distributor just to circulate the prints. Is there any questions on the various distribution fees? 30, 40% plus sub-distribution fee, which could range from 10 to 15%, and a rent distributor, which means that the producer would negotiate a deal with the distributor, less than 30% fee in those cases. No questions? So pay attention to distribution expenses. Again, studios like music labels, like television networks, are notorious for overcharging. This is what I mean by Hollywood accounting. They overcharge you for items, or sometimes even they've been allegedly double charge you as well. And so you as a producer, you're probably not, you can't really catch them. It's really hard to catch the studios with their accounting. And if you bring it up and if you ask for an audit, usually what ends up happening is you end up getting blackballed, because the industry hates when people critique the accounting. So the best you can do is pay attention to the accounting, but I don't know if you can necessarily stop the studios from double charging you or overcharging you for items. So Distribution duties. So obviously film distribution gets your movies or gets your print, right, or your digital file into theaters, gets your film into the theaters. And so they do that by negotiating a deal with the various theaters, whether it's domestic or international. So distribution also selects the appropriate release date. One of the things that distribution tries to do, and they work with the marketing folks again, is they try to get at least one good week. Again, how do you know a distribution campaign and a marketing campaign worked? Is that the movie opens strong. You have one good week, at least for studios. That's the rule of thumb, because it's distribution's job to place the movie in theaters where people are going to go out to see it, and obviously it's marketing's job to let people know that this movie's out in theaters to be seen. And so they select the appropriate release date so it stands out for a week or two, and that's their job. If the content is terrible, that's not distribution's fault, and it's not marketing's fault. That's the filmmaker's fault or actor's fault for not producing good content that the audience liked. So distribution is just about getting your movie into selecting the appropriate release date where it stands out for at least a week. They subtitle or dub your movie or film into different languages. So they dub it into Spanish or to French or to German, or they use subtitles in German or subtitles in French or Spanish, whatever, depending on what the particular audience likes. So here in the United States, obviously we're a little bit spoiled because we're used to watching all our movies in English, but in other places in the world, right, where maybe they don't produce as many movies as we do, and they either have to watch a subtitle version of an English language, they have to watch an English language film that could be subtitled in their language, whatever that language is, or dubbed in their language, whatever that language is. And so it's distribution's job to figure out whether or not the audience prefers subtitling or whether they prefer dubbing. So distribution negotiates with the various exhibitors, which I just discussed, the domestic theaters, whether it's AMC, Regal, Carmike, whatever here in the United States. They also have to deal with all the sub-distributors, places where they don't have offices. They also strike deals with the various television networks, cable networks, hotels, airplanes, and streaming services. So usually, if you're wondering how it works with airplanes, usually it's a flat fee, where the airlines pays a flat fee to the studio for playing that movie in the planes. They also exchange all the various monies, a peso, a franc, whatever the pound, whatever the monetary, whatever type of money they use in that particular country, and they exchange it back into dollars. So mind you, distribution also charges you for exchanging international money into dollars, which is interesting. They also place all the film's advertisements. So they're in charge of all the TV ads, all the billboards that are placed, social media, all those sorts of things. And what is the film rental? Film rental is the percentage of the box office that is that the exhibitor pays the distributor. It's the percentage of the box office that, again, the exhibitor pays to the distributor. We don't really know what the amount is. It is, generally speaking, it's a 50-50 deal. So that means if you're in the box office, oh, this movie made $300 million at the box office. Usually what that means is that the distributor collected about 150 million. Now, I say close to it because, yes, it's 50-50, but you also settle. So settle means essentially negotiate. You negotiate a percentage. So it may not be 50-50. You might get 49%. You might get 51%. Heck, you might get 45%. So it really varies. You have to negotiate and work with the film buyer. When I say film buyer, I'm referring to the theater. So what is the number one market in the world? It is the Asia Pacific market. It is by far the largest market. This is why um, the United States is trying to get as many movies as possible into the Chinese territory, because China obviously is a huge market for American films. Although, of course, their government's pretty strict about the kinds of movies and that can get into China, and they also have a pretty stringent quota, so it makes it pretty tough. But nevertheless, the Asia Pacific market is the number one market for American films, and the trend is that we're making these very expensive spectacles, right, that are targeting all of you folks. I'm assuming most of you are 25 and under, maybe a little bit older, but for the most part, the studios are still targeting you with these very expensive spectacles, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's the Marvel films, whatever you want to think about. And with these expensive spectacles that usually are franchise films, they're essentially trying to avoid riskier content. They don't like to take chances. I'm referring to the studios. This is why it seems like they keep repeating the same thing over and over again, because that over and over again has been successful, and we as consumers don't seem to be demanding more from the studios, so therefore they're not going to give us more or different. They're going to give us the same, because the studios are very risk adverse. Any questions? Questions? Okay, so carriage fees or television distribution. So television distribution, obviously, it's different than movies. Content is distributed differently. So we have carriage fees. So how much a television network charges a cable system or satellite company plays a critical role in how widely spread a network becomes. So as you can see here, ESPN charges a lot of money to the cable system providers or the satellite companies. So at last note, it was about $8 or $9. And so that's really expensive, how much ESPN charges. The reason that ESPN charges a lot is because their sports content is so expensive to buy. So they pass on that charge to us. And so they charge the cable system operators, about $8, maybe $9 per subscriber per month. So one of the things that's been happening, at least in cable, when it comes to carriage, is churn has been happening, which means that the number of subscribers keeps dropping, because obviously cable is quite expensive. And so what else was I going to say? Subscription fees. So this is where they charge a monthly fee. And so if you think about HBO I think charges what, $15.99, I think, HBO Max. So subscription fees is a form of distribution that cable networks utilize. Syndication, there's all sorts of syndication. There's first run syndication. If you think about game shows or talk shows, there's reruns, right? If you think about Friends or Seinfeld, is an example of off-net or reruns. And they are sold on a market-by-market basis. So it's when it's a first-run show or like a game show or a rerun, they are sold on a market-by-market basis. And stripping, they're sold on weekly strips, Monday through Friday. And so this is the reason why you're going to see Friends at the same time on the same channel, Monday through Friday. Or if it's Seinfeld or any of these syndicated shows, they strip them, meaning they place the show Monday through Friday at the same time. Deficit financing, again, this is how they pay back deficit financing. I think I mentioned in this class, I'm not sure maybe the last class. So deficit financing basically means that the showrunner is getting paid, let's say, $1.5 million per episode to produce a TV show, but it's costing that television producer $2 million to produce that show. So that means for each episode, they're $500,000 in deficit. And so the reruns, the syndication, helps the showrunner, the producer, pay back the deficit financing. Now, sometimes the studio or the network will pay for the entire cost of the show. That just means that there's no deficit financing, and usually means the network is going to keep more of the syndication money. So removal of FinCEN, financial syndication rules, basically means now that television networks can produce their own content and distribute their own content. So again, FinCEN or financial syndication rules means that a television network like an ABC or CBS or whatever can produce their own content and also make money on syndication for the content that they produced. It used to be that the television networks could not make any money on syndication. That's changed. So generally speaking, dramas like an ER generally do better in syndication, but that's not always the case. Obviously, if you think about Friends, if you think about Seinfeld, those examples are examples of shows that are sitcoms that are actually done quite well in syndication. The ideal candidate for television syndication historically is 100 episodes plus. So again, 100 episodes plus is the ideal candidate historically. Nowadays, really a good candidate for syndication could be anything above 65 episodes. So just nowadays it's changed. It's reduced the number. So international licensing and internet distribution are other ways of recouping production costs. So you can decide to circumvent the networks and just distribute your content online, or you can just, another way is that you can distribute your content internationally, and in this case, maybe not using the networks. And so that maybe it's your own production company. And you just like the film producer who makes deals with certain territories when it comes to your movies. Same sort of idea with television. You sell your television show on a country by country basis to recoup your production costs. Any questions? Now, the traditional sort of TV distribution that you're probably most familiar with is network television distribution. And so usually what ends up happening nowadays, thanks to William Paley, hopefully you remember who William Paley is. So usually now the network, right, produces content, and then their job is to distribute the content to the various affiliates. The affiliates do not belong to the network. The affiliates just agree to air network programming and to extend the reach of network programming. So generally speaking, in a typical network to affiliate deal, these are the types of shows that the network produces and then that the affiliates will televise. And if you're wondering what about the rest of the time, the affiliate has to buy its own programs or produce its own local content and air that. No questions? And so ad revenue depends on the age and size of the audience. So it's very possible to have a network that, has good ratings, but because they attract an older audience, it may not be as valuable. So for instance, CBS for a long time, their ratings were okay. They were not terrible. But the problem with CBS for a long time was that they primarily only attracted older audiences that were, over the age of 49. And once you're over the age of 49, people don't care about you. At least television doesn't care about you anymore because you're no longer a valuable audience. The audience they're really looking for is 18 to 49. And so, who measures the age and size of the audience? Well, it's measured by Nielsen. Most of you probably already know this. And they measure the ratings and the shares. And so, the rating is the percentage of TV households out of all the TVs within that particular market. How many are watching your particular television show out of all the TVs in that particular market, versus shares, which is the percentage of TVs turned on to your show in that market at that time. And obviously, they also do it by measuring the entire country as well. Of course, they don't just do individual markets. So, question to see if you guys are paying attention: is it possible to have a low rating and a high share? Yes, correct. Yes, thank you. Yes, all of you are correct. Yes. It's very possible. Yes. Good job. Yes, it's very possible to have a low rating. Let's say like those late night talk shows, right? They probably don't have the greatest ratings in the world because they're on so late. And if they're if the people happen to be parents like myself, we're exhausted by 11:30. We're not awake, or even midnight. And so we're dead asleep. And so we're not watching, but a lot of people are asleep as well by that time. So it's very possible for a late night talk show to have a low rating. But then based on TVs that are turned on, it could be pretty significant. So all of you are correct. Well done. So exhibition. So this would be the place. So AMC historically is the trendsetter. I think right now it's still currently the largest chain. And what I mean by trendsetter is that AMC was the first to develop stadium seating. Thank God, because I'm not very tall. I'm kind of short, especially when I was I'm kind of average size now, but when I was a kid, I was short, and so you know if you were sitting behind somebody who was pretty tall, you couldn't see. You'd have to like twist your head around that person, and so AMC really is the first one to really develop theaters with stadium seating, and really made it a point to build these stadium seating theaters throughout the country. So that was good. AMC also was the first to create the idea of the cup holder, which again was good for me because I don't know how many times I kicked over my soda and knocked it on the floor, and not only was the rug stained, but I just lost my soda. And so the cup holder made it less likely that you'd spill your soda. AMC also was one of the first to create different starting times for its movies, so that way you could have one snack bar. And so what I mean by that, they would start, let's say, a Star Wars at 7:20. They would have, let's say, a Marvel film started at 7:30. Then another film started at 7:40. So that way you have a slow and steady traffic that's flowing through the snack bar. And so AMC was really the first to figure that out and say, why don't we just stagger the starting times of the movies? And so that way we don't get a big rush of people coming in at 7 or 7:30. We stagger it so we get a steady flow of people at the snack bar so we can better serve them. And so AMC was really the first to do that. AMC was really also the first to start building multiplexes throughout the country. So AMC, again, trendsetter throughout, in this, I should say, in the industry. The exhibition also plays a critical role in determining how many screens the movie is going to be played in, because they help to determine how widely or how narrow a movie is going to be released. So within a specific theater, they're gonna tell you we want the movie in X number of screens. Maybe it's just one screen, maybe two, maybe three, maybe four. They're gonna tell you the number of show times that they want. So generally speaking, exhibitors really like short films. They really like 90-minute movies versus 2-hour films because they can get an extra screening in. So number of show times. They also determine the number of weeks that it's going to play in a theater. So it could range from, obviously 1 week, 2 weeks, or it can be 20 weeks. Just really depends on the theater, and whatever money that the exhibitor makes from this particular movie, they split the revenue with the distributor, again, through settling. And again, usually it's 50-50 split. They split the revenue. The exhibitor or theater gets about half. Distributor or studio or whoever gets about half. What age group is most likely to go to the movies? It's generally speaking, it's 25 to 39-year-olds. That's the group that's most likely to go to the movies. Again, 25 to 39. I mean, that group is closely followed by the 18 to 34-year-old. I mean, 18 to 24-year-olds. So it's pretty close. But it's 25 to 39. I wonder because of the disparity in age range. I'm not sure why they decided that would be one group. Anyways, 25 to 39. What ethnic group is most likely to go to the movies? It's Latinx is the group most likely to go to the movies. The most lucrative period would be the summer months. And so when I say summer months, for theaters, that really means Memorial Day through Labor Day is really their like summer season. And so between those two holidays is their most lucrative period, which is the summer months. Again, the end of May through the early part of September. So box office is their biggest revenue stream, and concessions is their second biggest revenue stream. I would say their biggest portion of profit, I would imagine, would be the concessions. If you did think about how much it costs to buy a popcorn, or how much it costs them to make a popcorn, there's probably a significant profit margin there for the theaters. If you think about how much it costs them to make a soft drink and how much they charge for a soft drink, it's pretty significant profit margin there. Now, ticket prices, at least pre-COVID, were at $9.16. It seems like the movie going is starting to pick up again. It seems like, at least. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not ticket prices actually increase moving forward. I don't know, but that's going to be interesting. Now, recently, there was a deal that occurred that might change exhibition moving forward. There was a deal done between AMC and Universal. Does anybody know what deal I'm talking about here? Anybody familiar with the deal? There was a very significant deal that was done in the movie industry between AMC Theaters and Universal Pictures. Does anybody know? Oh, very good. Yes. Excellent, Samantha. Yes. So basically, it's a 17-day, 3 weekends really, um, deal that was done between Universal and AMC. Very good, Samantha. Um, so it used to be that theaters had about between a 60 and 90-day window was a theatrical window. And with this new deal, as Amanda pointed out, this new 17-day deal, it's going to be interesting to see what happens because now the window has shrunk to 17 days, where it used to be that theaters had a window of about 90 days. So now it's 17-day window, deals signed between Universal and AMC, meaning that after 17 days, right, Universal can decide to pull its movies out of AMC theaters and do whatever they want with the movie. I'm assuming stream it or whatever. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward. So the MPAA rating system, one thing that has to be explained very clearly to parents, and I know I talk a little bit about this in 346, but I'm going to go a little bit more detail. So as you can see here with the rating system, again, it's intended for parents, and the intent is for parents to know exactly the kind of content that their kids are going to watch, or if they're going to watch content with their kids, the parents need to know exactly what this means. And so the MPA rating system tries to clearly tell parents what they're going to watch in the theater with their kids. And so now, if you're wondering, what if the kid sneaks in? Let's just say the kid decides to go to the movies with their friends, and they sneak in to a different theater. Let's just say that they're, I don't know, 12 years old, and they decide to sneak in, and they um, are successful in sneaking into an R movie. Is the theater still liable? Yes. I want to pronounce your name correctly. Is it Alid? Alid?
Yes.
Very good. You're right. It's the answer is no. If somebody sneaks in to, let's say a 12-year-old sneaks into an R-rated film, which, again, no one under 17 can be in there, the theater is not liable. That kid snuck in. So the theater is not going to get in trouble if a 12-year-old sneaks in to watch an R-rated film and ends up telling their parents, his or her parents, I snuck into an R-rated film and I seen this. The theater's not going to get in trouble. It's the kid, you know, probably shouldn't have told his parents or her parents. So the big thing that's happening right now, or people are discussing, I'm not sure if this is a good idea or a bad idea. I really don't know. Um, I mean, I do clearly believe that things that we see do have an effect on us. I do. I just don't know how much of an effect, but I do think it has an effect. So that said, one of the things that's being discussed is they're thinking about changing the rating system to now, if you have a smoking scene in a movie, that it automatically is going to receive an R rating. It's something that's been spiraling around, discussed. I'm not sure if it's gaining any traction. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with this. I'm not sure if they really should give an R rating just for a smoking scene, but you know, they're discussing this. So one last thing about the rating system. Know that, yes, it's called the MPA rating system, yes, but CARA means Classifications and Ratings Administration, is really the group that's responsible for assigning a rating to a movie. They're using the MPA rating system, but CARA is actually the one that's implementing the rating system, or giving the movie a rating. So I believe it's a bunch of housewives that live in the San Fernando Valley. I'm not sure who's a part of CARA, but it's a small group of folks who go in, watch a movie, and they give the movie a rating. And they're called CARA, Classifications and Ratings Administration. And so they're applying, CARA's applying the MPA rating system, but they're the ones that are actually rating the movie. Is that clear? That CARA actually provides the rating. So I don't know if anybody plans to move to San Fernando Valley, but you know, that's where CARA is located at. They're located around the Encino area. So if you have any plans to move to the valley, you should see if you can become part of CARA. I'm not sure how it works, honestly. I really wish I did know. So this is a little bit that explains our rating system, which I already sort of explained.
Did you ever wonder what separates a PG from a PG-13 movie, or what it takes to get slapped with a dreaded NC-17 rating? Hi, I'm Clint Davis, Scripps movie critic, and today I'm taking a look at movie ratings. Not thumbs up and thumbs down, but those little letters that tell parents whether or not it's okay to send their kids to the theater. The current 5-tier rating system used in America dates back to 1990 and includes G, PG, PG-13, R, and NC-17. These ratings are decided by the Motion Picture Association of America. MPAA ratings are not legally binding. For instance, a movie theater cannot get in trouble for allowing kids to go in and see an NC-17 movie, except for possibly in Tennessee, which is the only state that has a law on the books that prohibits kids from going to see movies that are, quote, harmful to children. In the 1990s, a parent tried to sue a California movie theater that allowed a 13-year-old boy to go see the R-rated movie Dead Presidents, but the complaint was dismissed. The MPAA was founded in 1922, and it quickly gained a reputation as championing censorship in Hollywood because its creator, William Hays, wrote a production code that outlined what content was acceptable and unacceptable to be included in movies. The Hays Code, as it was called, was active from 1930 to 1968. Things that were banned by the Hays Code included lustful kissing, interracial romance, illegal drug use, and showing a crime in enough detail that would make it easy to replicate in real life. Words like God and Jesus Christ were banned, as well as all curse words, including hell and damn. In 1968, the letter-based rating system was created. The first set of ratings were G, M, R, and X. The first movie to be rated R was 1968's The Split, starring Gene Hackman and Donald Sutherland. In 1972, the M rating was changed to the PG rating. And then in the early 80s, director Steven Spielberg called the head of the MPAA to suggest that there be a new rating created between PG and R because he'd taken a little bit of heat because of the gore in his PG-rated movie Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So in 1984, the PG-13 rating was created and has since arguably become the most sought-after rating for studios because of the massive box office success that can come with it. The very first movie to be rated PG-13 was 1984's The Flamingo Kid, a coming-of-age comedy starring Matt Dillon. By the late 1980s, the X rating had become synonymous with pornography, so the MPAA replaced it with the NC-17 rating in 1990. The Uma Thurman movie Henry and June was the first movie to be rated NC-17. The rating system hasn't been changed since 1990. It sounds weird to say this, but some of your favorite movies might have been X-rated when they first came out. Some of the classics of the 1970s and 80s that were rated X by the MPAA include A Clockwork Orange, Evil Dead, and Midnight Cowboy, which is the only X-rated movie to ever win Best Picture at the Oscars. So what things are allowed in each ratings tier? According to the MPAA, G-rated movies are allowed to have minimal depictions of violence, but absolutely no nudity, sex, or drug use. PG-rated movies can have some profanity and depictions of violence or brief nudity, but are not allowed to have any drug use content. Drug use on screen automatically equals a PG-13 rating. PG-13 rated movies can have nudity that is not sexually oriented. They can also have violence provided it's not both realistic and extreme or persistent. PG-13 movies can also have cursing, but the MPAA has a very specific and somewhat convoluted rule regarding how much and what kind of cursing. PG-13 movies are allowed to include a single use of, quote, one of the harsher sexually derived expletive words. Basically, that means you get one F-bomb in a PG-13 movie. Now, the line between R and NC-17 is a lot more vague. The MPAA rating board says it only slaps an NC-17 rating on movies that it deems appropriate only for an adult audience. In nearly all cases, an abundance of sex or nudity are what separates an R-rated movie from an NC-17, not violence or language. But it's not always sex, violence, language, and drug use that get a movie its rating. The MPAA has used some weirdly specific descriptions as to why it rated movies how it did in recent years. For instance, 1997's Bushwhacked was rated PG for language and a mild birds and bees discussion. 2001's Rollerball was rated PG-13 for content including extreme sports action. 2013's Cutie and the Boxer was rated R for nude art images. And perhaps the best one ever was 1995's Three Ninjas Knuckle Up, being rated PG-13 for non-stop ninja action. Can your preteen kids handle non-stop ninja action? Clearly, the MPAA doesn't think so. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to the Scripps National News YouTube channel.
So anyways, it does bring up an excellent point. The ratings are very vague. They have been critiqued by a lot of distributors and a lot of folks, I would say a lot of film directors have said in the past that the studio movies get a break. So if you're Disney or if you're Universal, if you're Paramount, you are going to get the benefit of the doubt versus an independent. Independent films, for the most part, they believe, are more harshly rated than studio movies, which I think in some cases that they do have a point.
Did you ever want?
Okay, so profit or define gross. And so gross, obviously, we're talking about revenue before taxes. And so what exactly is profit? What does that exactly mean? It doesn't always mean what you think it means. So obviously, most of us are familiar with the idea of actual or cash break even. In other words, your expenses, right, equal your revenue. So let's say if your checking account is at $0, you're at break even, right? Because your revenue is equal to your expenses. Hopefully none of you are at zero, mind you. But that would be an example of actual break even where revenue equals expenses. So if it says that in your contract that your revenue has to equal expenses, that means it's actual or cash break even. Now, your contract could say a contractual break even. So contractual break even means that the producer and the distributor agree that this is break even. So again, the producer and the distributor agree that you've reached break even. So I'm giving you kind of a vague definition, but think of it as a number. Let's just say the distributor and the producer agree that $250 million theatrical revenue in the United States, domestic, is contractual break even. Is that real break even? Actual break even? Well, we don't know. It might be or it may not be. But according to the producer and the distributor, they both agreed that contractual break even is going to be $250 million domestically. And they both sign off and they agree. This is the contractual break even. Does that make sense? That it's an agreement between the producer and distributor. Which is the last type of break even is the floating break even. Floating break even means that it's revenue when revenue equals expenses on a continuous basis. When revenue equals expenses on a continuous basis. When revenue equals expenses on a continuous basis. So the idea of floating break even, this is why so few movies actually ever break even. So those movies that you think that were profitable, in many cases actually end up losing money. So again, it's when revenue equals expenses on a continuous basis. So when a movie's being released theatrically, for example, obviously it's making money in the movie theaters, right? People are going in to watch the movie and they're buying their tickets to go watch this particular movie. But at the same time, the distributor, whoever the distributor happens to be, is spending money on billboards or radio spots or television advertising. And so the expenses that they're spending on the movie keeps increasing. So if you think about if you're in a swimming pool, right? If you float to the top, or whatever the feet of water is, if you're able to float, it keeps increasing, right? Just like the feet in a pool keeps increasing, the break-even point keeps increasing as well. So that's why I say it's when revenue equals expenses on a continuous basis. Continuous means that it keeps rising. Okay, define gross. So usually in a contract, you're going to see something that says define gross, which means revenue before taxes. And this is what the theater, well, not theaters, it's what the distributor considers to be revenue. So theatrical revenue would be film rental, the movie that they collected, not box office. It's theatrical revenue that they actually collected. Don't make that mistake. It's theatrical revenue or film rental that they actually collected. It's not box office. It's whatever they made in TV or internet licensing through pay-per-view or through video on demand or whatever. And this is also very important. Know that the studios only count 20% of home entertainment. So whether that's old VHSs, whether that's DVDs, or even streaming, again, even streaming, 80% of the revenue goes automatically to the studio. The producer only makes 20% of home entertainment, and streaming is considered to be home entertainment. So 80% goes to the studio and 20% goes to define gross or to the producer. And if the producer happens to make a movie that makes them any money on soundtracks, that's defined gross. And merchandising revenue, usually 50%, is considered gross. So all this is part of the gross. In other words, money that the studio counts as revenue. So whatever the 80% that the studio keeps for streaming, that's not counted as revenue. The 50% that the studio keeps for merchandising, doesn't count as revenue. The 50% that the theaters kept doesn't count as revenue. So it's only revenue that the studio collected. So this is the reason why it's very difficult for a movie to reach break even. And I'm talking about actual break even. So the high cost of production. So nowadays, studio movies, it's not unusual for a studio movie to cost $200 million to make. Now, and if you happen to shoot the movie on the lot, there's a 10% overhead. Yes, shoot the movie on a lot, it's a 10% overhead. So if it costs you $200 million to make, you'll add on $20 million because of that 10% overhead. And it's weird because oftentimes, I don't know if any of you ever worked on a lot or been on a lot. A lot of these sound stages or a lot of parts of this lot are empty. They're not even being used. But again, if they lease a sound stage or they lease or they're letting you use a part of their land, they charge you a 10% overhead, which again, I think is weird. There's also first dollar fees by top actors. So that means any money the studios collected, if they have a big star attached to the movie, the big star can negotiate first dollar fees. In other words, they get a percentage of all the money that the studio collects. Does anybody know who would be some actors that can negotiate this sort of deal? Not everybody can. It's only a handful of actors that can negotiate this sort of deal. Yes, Rihanna, for sure. Tom Cruise can negotiate that. Tom Hanks, probably. I mean, I don't know if he's as big of a star as he used to be, but probably. He's a good actor. Tom Cruise for sure. Robert Downey for sure. Scarlett Johansson for sure. Trying to think of who else would probably be a for sure. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, our next president. I'm not sure. I'm just saying. I don't know. I'm not sure if he wants to be president, but the Rock would definitely be somebody who can negotiate a first dollar deal. If you think about Mark Wahlberg, Brad Pitt, maybe. Brad Pitt's an interesting one. Maybe he might be able to. Brad Pitt, I'm not so sure. Brad Pitt's, mind you, I think Brad Pitt's a great actor. Not only, I know people think he's a great looking person, and he is good looking too, but I also think he's actually quite talented. But he's never really carried a movie by himself. Think about the one movie that he carried by himself. There hasn't been one that it's a huge hit, but maybe Johnny Depp, pre his last marriage, yet this last marriage was a huge fiasco for Johnny Depp, even though he's the one that got his finger chopped off and a lot of terrible things happened to him. He was blamed for it and got fired. So publicly he has a black eye. So maybe Johnny Depp still, certainly before his last marriage, sure. Leonardo DiCaprio for sure. Jennifer Lawrence, probably yes. I think most of you got all of them that I can think of. There's probably a few others that can, but there isn't that many people. You guys mentioned most of them. You ladies mentioned most of them as well. And so there's only a handful that can negotiate first dollar. So whatever, think of first dollar fees as this. Somebody mentioned Robert Downey Jr. Or Leonardo DiCaprio. DiCaprio could say, okay, I want $10 million to be in this movie. They're going to pay them the $10 million, and he could say to the distributor, okay, I want 5% of first dollar. So let's just say they collected, um, I don't know, $500 million from this movie. So they collected $500 million, and he's getting first dollar. He's getting 5% of that 500 million, right? So that's another $50 million on top of whatever he made. So some of these big time actors and some of these big time actresses make a boatload of money, um, but it also makes it more difficult to reach theatrical break even if you're giving all your money away to your top talent. So it's the good of having a star, but also the bad of having a star. Like everything in life, right? It's a double-edged sword. So P&A costs, so prints and advertising plus a 10% overhead. So again, if you hire the studio to do your marketing, they're going to charge you whatever the P&A costs plus 10%. The exhibitor is going to keep 50% for the box office for themselves. The distributor is going to charge you 35% as a distribution fee, which, well, between 30 and 35%, probably 30% for North America, and then 40% internationally, et cetera, et cetera. Deferments, if there's any bonuses to be paid to a producer. So let's just say that the movie made a certain dollar amount, you pay that filmmaker a bonus, for instance. And then you got to pay back all the interest and taxes. And so because of all these different expenses, it's very difficult for a movie to break even, actual break even, um, even if it makes, let's say, $2 billion. So there's a simple formula that you guys, well, I don't know if you want to know, but there's a way of figuring out box break even. So if you take the production cost plus the marketing cost and you multiply it by 3.5, you can kind of figure out if the film broke even or not. So again, you take production cost, you take marketing cost, and you multiply it by about 3.5 nowadays, and you can kind of figure out if it broke even. So if a movie costs $200 million, you add $100 million for marketing, multiply it by 3.5. If it exceeded that number, it probably broke even. And again, a huge percentage of streaming and DVD goes to the studio. So any questions on questions? Okay, awesome. Okay, let's move on to the world of sports. There is a whole, well, there's a whole lot to cover about sports, but I won't get into it too much. It's a capstone class. It's just basic knowledge. You don't have to be a hardcore sports fan to understand what I'm going to be talking about. It's not too complicated. Um, so, anyways, Henry Chadwick. Henry Chadwick is famous and important because he created the box score. So again, he created the box score. And Henry Chadwick also helped make baseball popular because people were able to read the box score in the newspapers. And so that way you can keep track of your favorite team or your favorite player by following the box score. I believe Henry Chadwick also created the K for strikeout, so that way you know how often your pitcher struck somebody out or how often your batter struck out. So again, Henry Chadwick created the box score, and he helped baseball become important because the box score became included in a lot of newspapers, and it helped people keep track of their favorite team, favorite player by looking at the box score. The Cincinnati Red Stockings. Cincinnati Red Stockings were the first professional baseball team. So Cincinnati Red Stockings, first professional baseball team. Reserve clause. Reserve clause was put in 1879, and a reserve clause basically meant that you as the player were stuck playing for a team. In other words, the only way you could leave the team was through retirement, or if they cut you, or if you were injured, right? So the reserve clause was a binding agreement between the player and the team. There was no free agency. Once the team drafted you, you were part of that team, whether you liked it or not. Oops. Now, mind you, the reserve clause would last for about 100 years. So it started in 1879, and it would not end until the 1970s. Gentleman's agreement in 1887. Really, a gentleman's agreement was an agreement amongst the owners to not integrate, not to racially integrate the league. So there was black players that played in baseball before 1887, but after the gentleman's agreement, that no longer was the case. So again, there's no written law or rule or anything that states that black players couldn't play with white players. It just was a gentleman's agreement amongst the owners that they were not going to have black baseball players play on their team. You could call it collusion, I suppose. But again, it's a gentleman's agreement to not have or to not racially integrate their teams. 1903 was the first World Series. Again, first World Series. It was between Boston and Pittsburgh. First World Series between Boston and Pittsburgh. Cy Young, first star pitcher. So Cy Young, first star pitcher. He had 511 wins in his career, and he still has the most wins of any pitcher in the history of baseball. So again, first star pitcher. Cy Young has the most wins of any pitcher in the history of baseball, has 511 victories. It's a record that probably will never be broken. 511 is pretty phenomenal. Federal League versus Major League Baseball. And again, I don't really know what's discussed in comm law or in your law classes. Is anybody familiar with Federal League versus Major League Baseball? Hmm. Okay. I'll assume that they don't talk about it. Okay. So the Federal League was a competitor to Major League Baseball. So going back to the idea of the reserve clause, there was no free agency, right? This idea that if you were signed to a baseball team, you could not um, switch teams. There was no such thing as a free agent. And so the Federal League was a competitor to Major League Baseball. And the Federal League actually offered free agency. And so it was a league that was competing against Major League Baseball. And some baseball players that were playing in Major League Baseball did go over to the Federal League. And so what the baseball owners did, they raised the wages of their players so that way the Federal League, they wouldn't go over to the Federal League. And so the Federal League basically argued that the Major League Baseball colluded to get rid of the Federal League as a competitor. And so, so essentially, what ended up happening was that the courts did agree to a certain extent that the Major League Baseball did collude, but they also said that that Major League Baseball is it does not represent interstate commerce. And so because it doesn't represent interstate commerce, it really cannot collude. Major League Baseball essentially is just entertainment. And because of this court case, essentially, Major League Baseball was allowed to operate as a monopoly. So again, the court ruled that yes, Major League Baseball, did collude, but it didn't represent interstate commerce. So because it didn't represent interstate commerce, it really can't collude. It really can't be considered a cartel. And so therefore, the courts basically ruled in baseball's favor and basically said that baseball could operate as a monopoly. Now, mind you, the person who oversaw the case was Kennesaw Mountain Landis. Just so happens that Kennesaw Mountain Landis ends up becoming the um, first commissioner of baseball shortly after the ruling on this case. So Kennesaw Mountain Landis, first commissioner, first baseball commissioner. He's known for two things. Number one, he's known for the Black Sox scandal, where he kicks out, or not kicks out. he bans several players from the Chicago White Sox for losing the World Series on purpose, called the Black Sox scandal. He's known for that. And number two, the other big thing he's known for is not integrating baseball. So again, Kennesaw Mountain Landis is known for the Black Sox scandal, where essentially he banned several members of the Chicago White Sox for losing the World Series on purpose. People think that was a good thing. He actually saved baseball for that on that part. Critiqued, or the bad part of Kennesaw Mountain Landis, was that he didn't racially integrate the league. Again, there was no rule to prevent black players from playing in Major League Baseball. But Kennesaw Mountain Landis, under his tenure, the Negro League was pretty vibrant at the time, and so he could have easily integrated the league, but he didn't do it for whatever reason. Babe Ruth, the first superstar hitter. So he changed the way the game was played. So Babe Ruth essentially introduced the idea of the home run. So before Babe Ruth, home runs were few and far between, largely because people were coached to chop down the ball. So you would hit the ball into the ground, you wouldn't hit it up into the air. So one thing that Babe Ruth did was, when he came into the league, was he essentially would hold the bat at the end, at the bottom of the barrel, and kind of uppercut the ball a little bit. And so he was able to drive the ball a long ways, but also high up in the air, hence more home runs. And so Babe Ruth helped to introduce the idea of the home run into baseball. The New York Yankees is the dominant franchise in Major League Baseball history. They have many of the best players in the history of baseball played with the Yankees. Many of the best teams in the history of baseball played for the Yankees. And so I won't show you a clip of the 1927 team, but there's several teams in the history of baseball that are Yankee teams that are considered to be amongst the best in the history of baseball, a whole bunch, including the 1998 team. Jackie Robinson, first black player to play in Major League Baseball. And so he's considered to be a very important figure, not only in sports, but in society. Some people think of him as equally important as Martin Luther King. This idea that, you have a black player working alongside with white players for a cause and working together to achieve great things. So you need this in a team, right? Everybody has to come together and pull in the same direction. And so Jackie Robinson's successful Major League career illustrated that a black man and a white man could work together to achieve common goals. And so again, first black player in Major League Baseball. And again, there's other players that played in professional baseball before it became Major League Baseball. So bear that in mind. But again, under Major League Baseball, he's the first black player. And also the first black player to be voted the most valuable player. So again, first black player in Major League Baseball history, very important figure. Also won a most valuable player award. 1951, Dodgers and Giants. This is considered to be one of the most famous baseball games in the history of baseball. It is the first nationally televised baseball game in the history of baseball. Again, the first nationally televised baseball game in the history of baseball. It's called The Shot Heard Around the World. So if you're not familiar with this baseball game, I'll show you the last part of the game.
Number one, The Shot Heard Round the World.
The last time for the night. The Giants' catch looks slim, almost nil. Now it's a
So a little funny story about that home run. Turns out that that Bobby Thompson cheated. he he knew the pitch that was going to be thrown to him. I guess he was tipped off. I don't know how he was tipped off. I think somebody was on second base, but he knew exactly what the pitch was going to be, and he got tipped off, and he hit a home run. And so it's a little backstory to that home run. Anyways, Flood versus Kuhn. So Flood versus Kuhn tests the reserve clause. Remember we talked about the reserve clause in 1879? This is another Supreme Court case that happens in 1975. And it tests the reserve clause. Basically, Curt Flood, this very good baseball player who played for the St. Louis Cardinals, gets traded to the Philadelphia Phillies, doesn't want to play for the Phillies because the Phillies are terrible, and essentially wants to get out of the contract, and he can't. And so he ends up taking a baseball to the Supreme Court, where he loses. So again, Curt Flood loses. Bowie Kuhn, who is the commissioner of Major League Baseball, wins. But this court case is very important because even though Flood lost shortly thereafter, Major League Baseball will create free agency for its players. And this happens, I think, the year afterwards. And last but not least, we have Vin Scully. So Vin Scully, probably the best broadcaster in the history of Major League Baseball. Maybe perhaps the best broadcaster in the history of sports. Maybe. Was a broadcaster for 67 years. So one of the great stories about Vin Scully was that when he first came over to start broadcasting games in Los Angeles, the Dodgers were initially playing their games at the Coliseum, where USC plays its football games. And so the acoustics inside the Coliseum were terrible. And so people would take their transistor radios to listen to the game because they couldn't hear what the announcer was saying. But Vin Scully was such a great broadcaster that even when Dodger Stadium was built and people were listening to the games at Dodger Stadium where the acoustics are much better, people still brought their transistor radios to listen to Vin Scully broadcast the game on radio. I know, and also some people, let's just say there's a simulcast. There's Vin Scully broadcasting it on Dodger game on radio, but then you also have the Dodgers playing on television, and there's somebody else that's broadcasting the game on TV. A lot of people that I know, including myself, mind you, would turn down the volume on the television. Yes, I'm watching the game on TV, but I'm listening to Vin Scully's voice on the radio. So perhaps the best broadcaster in the history of baseball, Vin Scully, who I do believe holds the record for the longest broadcasting career, 67 years. It's pretty phenomenal. Hopefully this link works. Let's see, does it work? Let's see if it...
Many years ago, a little red-headed boy was walking home from school, passing a Chinese laundry, and stopped to see the score of a World Series game posted in the window. The Yankees beat the Giants 18-4 on October the 2nd, 1936. Well, the boy's reaction was pity for the Giants, and he became a rabid Giants fan from that day forward, until the joyous moment when he was hired to broadcast Brooklyn Dodger games in 1950. Ironically, October the 2nd, 2016 will mark my final broadcast of a Giants-Dodger game, and it will be exactly 80 years to the day since that little boy fell in love with baseball. God has been very generous to that little boy, allowing him to fulfill a dream of becoming a broadcaster and to live it for 67 years. Since 1958, you and I have really grown up together through the good times and the bad. The transistor radio is what bound us together. By the way, were you at the Coliseum when we sang Happy Birthday to an umpire? Were you among the crowd that groaned at one of my puns? Or did you kindly laugh at one of my little jokes? Did I put you to sleep with the transistor radio tucked under your pillow? You know, you were simply always there for me. I've always felt that I needed you more than you needed me, and that holds true to this very day. I've been privileged to share in your passion and love for this great game. My family means everything to me, and I'll now be able to share life's experiences with them. My wife Sandy, our children Kevin, Todd, Aaron, Kelly, and Catherine, along with our entire family, will join me in sharing God's blessings of that precious gift of time. You folks have truly been the wind beneath my wings, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me on this incredible journey of 67 years of broadcasting Dodger baseball. You know, friends, so many people have wished me congratulations on a 67-year career in baseball, and they've wished me a wonderful retirement with my family. And now, all I can do is tell you what I wish for you. May God give you for every storm a rainbow, for every tear a smile, for every care a promise, and a blessing in each trial. For every problem life seems a faithful friend to share, for every sigh a sweet song, and an answer for each prayer. You and I have been friends for a long time, but I know in my heart that I've always needed you more than you've ever needed me. And I'll miss our time together more than I can say. But you know what? There will be a new day and eventually a new year. And when the upcoming winter gives way to spring, rest assured, once again, it will be time for Dodger baseball. So this is Vin Scully wishing you a very pleasant good afternoon wherever you may be.
What did I say about the New York Yankees? The most dominant franchise in baseball history in terms of number of championships, and also some of the best players in the history of baseball played for the Yankees. So Vin Scully is, again, one of the best broadcasters, perhaps in the history, certainly in the history of baseball. Perhaps some people call him the best broadcaster ever. He was named the sports broadcaster of the 20th century. I think we're very blessed to have him as we're as Dodger fans. If you were a Dodger fan, we're very blessed to have him for 67 years. He's like a poet. He's like a poet using a microphone as he's describing the action on the baseball field. So I think it's 5:30. So that means it's the end of lecture. Everybody. Any questions? Don't be sad. Although it does bring tears in my eyes every time I hear him say that.